Bed-Stuy is like where a lot of performers are living these days, stand-up comics and improvisers. But you are both of those things, correct?
All of those things, yeah. Stand-up, improv is my first love. So yeah, that's the big one.
See, I have the Herald sign on my refrigerator.
Of course, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so I was taking UCB classes for like 2.5 years pretty consistently, and then March of 2020 happened. And then, which I'm sure you know,
course, yeah.
UCB freaking closed down here in New York. But we were just talking about LA. So what were you doing in LA? And then how'd you start your improv journey? Let's just start from the freaking beginning.
Let's do it. Yeah, I just got back from LA. I was just taking some general meetings, which are kind of surreal. It's meeting with these people who could change your life, but you're getting a casual coffee. So it's very much like a first date, but it's with someone who's like a development executive for a major network or something. It's crazy. And that was just a wild thing that fell into my lap through a series of very fortunate events. But yeah, I did improv, like whatever my version of improv was in like high school. I grew up on Whose Line Is It Anyway, you know, like some short formy stuff. And then, yeah, there was like an improv team at my college that I didn't get on, but I'm getting the last laugh now. So yeah. And yeah, I mean, I always worshiped UCB from afar. I think someone like maybe did like a summer, you know, month-long class or something at UCB, and then they brought back the manual. And so we all just like gathered around it and, you know, gleaned every bit of wisdom from it and learned how to do improv, like long form stuff. And yeah. Then I had a traveling job in higher education, which was a very weird experience, footnote in my personal history. But while I was traveling on the road, I would just like look up whatever city I was in, improv. And I did all these drop-ins at like the Washington Improv Theater, Improv Boston, Philly Improv Theater. So like I kind of had this like touring lifestyle by the time I finally moved to New York. And yeah, then you get to New York, and finally it's like you get to take UCB classes, which I did the very first day in New York was like my first class at UCB. Like I wasted no time. And I did the intensives too, so it was like 6 hours of improv every single day for a week.
Oh, wow, okay.
And then you're done, and then I did an intensive for 201, which was like 3 hours a day for 2 weeks, and then finally it was like they don't do intensives for like 301 and 401. But it was like by the time I'm done with 201, I am in 301, like, you know, going. Like I wanted to waste no time and set kind of a land speed record, I think, for UCB curriculum. And yeah, you know, the kind of pyramid scheme of UCB is that you have to take all the classes before you're eligible to audition, you know, for teams. And I was finally eligible. And it was all,
I think it was, I don't remember the period of time, but it was definitely not, you couldn't take it like every 3 months. Like you needed to consistently take it. And maybe not as close as like 201 and 101 as you did, but definitely like pretty consistently.
Yeah. And it was funny too, because they the business model, you know, was very much all about the school portion of it, because they made the shows amazingly cheap. Like the tickets were like $5.
Yeah, and we always had to go to the show.
Yeah, and then with your student ID, you got into the shows for free. So the shows were so accessible, so cheap, but the classes were pretty expensive. And then once everyone in the improv community had taken like improv 1 through 3, they were like, we have to create an improv 4, and you have to take that one too before you can audition. And then there was like the UCB Academy and like all these new hurdles that you had to go through, but I had finally like become eligible to audition
for the Lloyd team.
For the Lloyd team, had my first ever audition. My suggestion was split pea soup. We did an okay set. I wasn't like wildly proud of it, but you know, I wasn't kicking myself or anything. And then I didn't get it. But then luckily, if I can't have it, no one can. The pandemic hit, and then that, you know, ravaged the whole thing. But it's been kind of interesting. Like I think, especially in New York, UCB was certainly like, I was very myopic about it. Like I had my blinders up, and UCB was the only thing. Like I never considered the Pit or the Magnet or like indie improv, anything like that. And with UCB shutting down, it like kind of like created this new, like it's kind of reminiscent of the original UCB in like the late 90s, early 2000s, where people have to get creative and like create spaces for themselves because they don't just like freely exist. And, you know, the one that everyone's been reading about from afar is like no longer a thing. And so all of a sudden, like it was kind of a real gift for me when we, you know, we left for a little bit for the pandemic. And then when things were chilling out and New York was reopening a little bit, we got back here and started like doing some stuff at UCB. And then like now, like, you know, now I'll book a show at Auto Shrunken Head, which is this like, it's in the East Village. It's this tiki bar that plays like grunge music, but they have a little room in the back where you can do an improv show for like 3 people. And yeah, like I never would have considered stuff like that because I was so obsessed with the concept of UCB. And so I got back, and then Asylum NYC, which is at the same space as the old UCB Chelsea, has become my like home theater, which is, I responded to an Instagram post. They were having auditions for their house team, or I think they don't call it a house team, but it is effectively that. But it's the main stage show, Asylum Presents. And yeah, they had like a round of auditions, and because of the UCB of it all, I was like so honored just to even be auditioning, like to get a time slot. And then getting called back was the craziest thing that's ever happened for me. And then actually being one of the people cast was mind blowing. And it's been such a fun experience. Yeah.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Midland, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
so what was your transition in terms of like growing up in Texas, coming to New York, and then just becoming a full-time theater geek, as I am myself. So it's okay. I'm calling you that too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so for anyone listening who doesn't know, Midland is it is the birthplace of George W. Bush.
I played a tennis tournament there, by the way. So I was there for like 3 days. Yeah.
In Midland?
In Midland, Texas. There was like a 16 and under national open. I played tennis pretty competitively as a younger kid, but that was like the only 2 times I went to Texas were for tennis.
Wow.
So I didn't spend much time outside.
That makes
besides
sense.
Playing tennis.
I think it's all blocked off. So like amateur tennis players like myself couldn't play there, but there is the George W. Bush Tennis Pavilion, which is probably where you played. It's like
I don't remember some big center, maybe something like that. I should remember that it was George Bush though.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So he's our like hometown hero, and and then Friday Night Lights is literally like my hometown.
Oh, okay, amazing show.
Yeah. And the movie, when they were making it, I was like 6 years old, and they had a big cattle call for extras, and I went up to it, and it's like being an extra.
Oh, that was your first credit?
I didn't get it.
Oh.
Yeah. They told me I was not good enough to be an extra. And having done background work now, it's not hard. So,
okay.
So yeah, it was pretty insulting as a toddler to be told that you don't have it. And we're literally casting like 1,000 people to stand in the stands. But yeah, so like ever since then I had like a vendetta against the entertainment industry. And so now I've been trying to break in and prove them wrong. And I think that's what I'm doing now. So yeah. I mean, I loved watching comedy, and like I've never considered really doing anything else. Like even I think briefly I like wanted to be a lawyer, and then I was like, no, I think I just want to play a lawyer in a movie. So yeah, and I went to Texas Christian University in Fort Worth.
The Horned Frogs.
The Horned Frogs.
You impressed that I knew that?
I'm very impressed. Are you a football fan?
Well, I played tennis at UConn. So you guys actually just transferred to the same conference that we're in randomly. UConn and TCU are in the same football conference. So you guys just smack us around in football, and then occasionally if we go down there for tennis, I'm sure we wouldn't do as great. But like Texas school is great at sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we're a phenomenal football school. Actually, TCU is ranked.
LaDainian Tomlinson.
That's right. I have a signed TCU helmet. That's like the only piece of any like kind of memorabilia that I have. I bought a TCU helmet signed by him.
Oh yeah, by him?
Yeah.
Oh nice.
LT.
And he played on the Jets too. So maybe you New York freaking Jets people know who we're talking about.
There we go. Yeah, LT, greatest running back of all time.
Yeah, right.
Is a Horned Frog. Yeah. So I studied acting at TCU, and it was a really lovely time. And it's funny too because I've since seen TCU listed in like articles of like some of the most conservative schools in the country, and it's wild to me because I'm from a place that's like 82% Trump voters, and when I got to TCU, especially being in the theater community, it was like this liberal oasis to me, like just because like comparatively it was actually much more progressive than my hometown. And so yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes articles like that are very clickbaity and like paint with pretty broad strokes, but yeah, it was a lovely place that I enjoy going back to, and like I'm very much like sitting at this dive bar in Brooklyn watching every TCU football game this year. It's been really fun. Then moving to New York, it was interesting. Like I sometimes regretted not applying to like NYU or any schools directly in the city and just like diving straight in. But
how was the acting program at TCU? You said it was like a pretty liberal type place. And what year was that? Like where you were actually there, and then where were other people coming in from?
Yeah. I started at TCU in 2013, graduated 2017, and I think my freshman year was the first year that TCU had more people from out of state than in state. It's a private school, so tuition's the same for everybody. And I had some nice scholarships, which were very, very helpful because it's a pretty expensive spot. And yeah, people like, I think because TCU played in the Rose Bowl in like 2010, like weirdly that, like there was this huge like influx
of money, endowment. And maybe some of the alumni were like, all right, we'll give them a few shekels, whatever.
Yeah. And so then apparently like all these people from SoCal started like applying to TCU because they fell in love with the school.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great.
So yeah, a lot of people from Southern California, like Kansas City has a lot of like people, and then Chicago are like all of our biggest feeders for TCU, which was random. But now I have like couches to crash on all over the country, which is really nice. Yeah, big fan of TCU, and yeah, I think like Dallas Fort Worth was like a good metroplex to get my feet wet in, like just being from a town where it's a larger city than people think, Midland. Like we have cars and stuff. I have people who are also from Texas who thought that I like rode a horse to school every day, and that is not exactly the vibe. But it is like a small city, and so I think that if I had come straight into New York, it may have been a little bit of a culture shock. So yeah, I was eager to get here when I finally did, and I got to spend some fall breaks and stuff while I was in college, visiting friends who were at NYU and stuff like that. So I got to try out the city a little bit before fully committing to it. But yeah.
Did you ever feel like being in Texas, you kind of felt out of place being a full like a person who really loved theater, or when you like got to New York was like, all right, I'm finally home?
It's interesting. Yeah. I love sports and stuff. Like I played, I quit one sport a year actually because of theater. Like I always used to resent High School Musical because they make it look so easy for Troy Bolton to like balance.
To just break into song and, and then go win the game, win the state title.
Just, casually juggle the schedule.
Yeah, Corbin Bleu had the more realistic situation. He really needed to figure out his career after that movie.
Yeah. And so like, I quit baseball first, and then football, and then basketball was the last to go. But like I loved getting involved in athletics, and I'm a big fan of sports. So I'm kind of the outsider in that way, weirdly, now with all my theater and like improv and stuff, friends. But it is pretty wild to now be around people who are as passionate about improv as people from my hometown are about like high school football. Yeah.
Did you get into stand up after the pandemic, or how did you kind of balance that being, improv first?
Yeah, I did stand up a handful of times pre-pandemic, and it was never consistent enough to like really develop my own comedic voice or anything. And like I'd done some open mics, but especially with how crowded open mics are, it's like doing a 5 all of a sudden is like, all right, you have to do 2. It's like how much of an impression can you really make in 2 minutes? So yeah, it was tricky, but I did perform at some cool spots. But it wasn't until I've really started to blend like stand up with original characters as well. Like it was earlier this year that I did characters for the first time, just because I was actually going to do a sketch in a show with a friend, and then that friend tested positive for COVID, and I was just like, well, I still want to do this show. Can I just like turn one of the characters from our sketch into like a solo piece or whatever? And gave me the opportunity to start like working on a set, and then the person finally like tested negative in time for the show. But I was like, can we also do the character thing? Because I'm actually kind of more passionate about that at this point. And yeah, that was like the first time I ever did a character set. And then I think a lot of the just setup of the characters that I'm doing is like stand-up-y in itself, And so I do a pretty weird set when I perform live, where I blend character and stand up and stuff, where it's like I kind of just piss everybody off, it's characters, but somehow I try to win.
Well, there's no correct way to do comedy, like doing stand up, doing improv, and then doing characters, improv and stand up all in one. It's a beautiful thing, it seems like. Did you go back to Texas during the pandemic after you were here for a couple of years?
Yeah. So my fiance, she moved into New York with me at the beginning of 2020, and then she booked this show at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. It's like this world-class Irish step dancing show, and she was the vocalist for it.
What's step dancing?
So I'm gonna butcher it, but like,
is it kind of like tap dancing or no?
Yeah. It's actually the whole show is like the American tap dancers versus the Irish step dancers. It's like the big device battle of the show. Yeah. So it's this amazing thing, and these people from like Australia and Ireland get flown out to Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, and it's like the greatest Irish step show in the world. And it's just at this theme park in rural Virginia. And Lexi was the vocalist there. And so right when the pandemic was really getting kind of crazy, I just booked an overnight bus, and I waited out part of the storm with her in Williamsburg, Virginia, because it was just a lot cheaper and there's a lot more.
Oh, you said William? I thought you meant Williamsburg, Brooklyn. That's funny. Williamsburg, Virginia.
Yeah, Williamsburg, VA, Colonial Williamsburg. Yeah. And so we like waited out the storm a little bit there because she had a lease that she couldn't really get out of for 6 months, and I was just doing like month to month, living in some literal Harry Potter closet. So I was eager to get
Under
out
the
of there
steps.
anyway. Literally, yeah. It was so tiny, and $1,000 a month, and like deep Brooklyn too. I'm bad at finding apartments, but yeah. So we waited that out. We found a dog that we were going to foster, and then within 30 seconds of fostering him, it was like, all right, this guy's a permanent fixture in our lives.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can't foster dogs. That's a bad idea for me. And yeah. So then the lease was up, and New York was still not really open yet. So we moved back to Texas for about a year. And so, yeah, not to Midland, to Fort Worth, which is a little bit more, progressive, and just there's more to do a little bit.
Well,
yeah.
what kind of stuff were you doing when you were down there?
I was
Just trying to do theater stuff?
I was just working from home, doing like customer service stuff, like online.
Oh,
It was
wow.
like pretty much a screeching halt in terms of the comedy stuff that I was doing. And based on how intensely involved I was with UCB right when the pandemic hit, I would have thought I would have become one of those people that was doing like, improv shows via Zoom every night and everything. And I got burned out on that so immediately that I started to kind of panic and think like, am I ever going to love this again? And luckily then the first like class that I took, like the second I got back to New York, I was immediately in love again. But yeah, I was really burned out. I think that I had put all of my eggs in one basket, and then that basket shut down permanently in its New York version.
Jess, you were on like the same timeline as me. I had can't remember his name. Maybe it was like Brandon Ramika or something like that.
Yeah.
His name sounded like that.
Rameka, yeah.
Something like that. So anyway, he was our 401 teacher, and like during the time when we were all like writing our reviews for the teacher in class, like we had our performance that Saturday, and that Saturday was like March 13th, 2020 was like the day when everyone was saying, all right, just wait it out 2 weeks or whatever. So that was going to be my second time trying out for the Lloyd team. The first time they didn't like me, I guess. So I was about to try out for the Lloyd team. And we just found out that like my audition a week and a half later just wasn't going to happen. So I moved to my dad's house in Long Island, and then slowly started to pick up more and more stand-up comedy, since like improv wasn't really an option for, until like 8 months after March 13th of 2020,
Yeah. And it was a Friday, March 13th, because I remember it was a Friday the 13th that it all went crazy.
Oh my God,
to add
yeah.
insult to injury.
Insane.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like, I think pivoting, and like, I wish that I had gotten into like TikTok and stuff before, because I was pretty late to the game on that. And it feels like I have some friends who really blew up, and all of them are truly incredibly funny people. But I think right as the pandemic hit, people were like developing their roster of like who they were going to follow through this pandemic. Like
totally.
Like they're building out like, who's going to get me through this?
I remember that. Like the first 3 months, like from March to June, I was like, what the shit is this TikTok app?
Yeah.
It's just like everybody's dancing on it. People are getting hundreds of millions of views. I didn't even download it until like August or September, I think, after that like 6 months real big jump in the United States, especially.
Yeah. And I was slow to the game, and I think that like it was pretty easy to get a follow at that point. Like, I think that people were just, the second it's like, oh, you're funny, you might help me survive this horrible time.
Yeah,
like, boom,
you and Tiger King, right?
Yeah. And so I have some friends who like really popped off during the pandemic, and I took my time getting onto TikTok, and like I think that maybe I'm just not as hot as my friends or something, but like like I've had some successful videos on there, but it just doesn't always translate to a follow as easily, because I think people are kind of like, my roster's full. Like I've committed to these people. They got me through the pandemic. Like, you're just I'll give you a like.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I think is always changing, and I think when you look at like terms of like creator economies, is YouTube. Like it does seem like you're seeing a new YouTuber every week.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't really feel so much like that with TikTok. It just feels like there's X amount of creators maybe that and then it hasn't really changed as much, whereas YouTube, I start to see more people each week. And I'd like to think that as well, being a creator, having this podcast, everybody watching and listening, and then just consistently putting out as much stuff as possible. Your fiance is improv performer as well?
Yeah, she just had her, she's starting to, yeah. She took an improv 1 class through the Squirrel Comedy Theater, and she literally just had her class show this weekend. Phenomenal. Well done.
She did a good job.
Yeah, and she and I have hosted some shows together, and like I've had her like jump on some shows with me as well. And yeah, she's a fantastic performer. She studied musical theater, and so she's very.
You guys meet at TCU?
Yeah, we did on the set of a TCU commercial, actually. Yeah.
What was the commercial?
It was like the hype video for our football team that played at the beginning of every one of our games.
Your face is like painted half purple.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we met and became super fast friends, and then within like we became friends for a couple of years before we started dating, and it's a pretty good foundation. Yeah, we've been dating for like 5.5 years now.
Wow.
Engaged for a couple. Yeah. So it's a good vibe.
Do you see yourself spending the rest of your life in New York?
In New York, yeah. I think so. Yeah, I would love to be in New York and someplace else as well.
Sure,
To establish myself like as someone who can afford to live in multiple places would be obviously pretty wild. I don't know, it's I think I really love Austin. Like we've been there a couple times more recently, and we hosted a show, my fiance and I, during Pride called Texas Pride. Everything's gayer in Texas, and it was an all LGBT Texan lineup here in New York at Asylum actually, and super fun because I think this is true for a lot of places, Texas being the pinnacle of them, I think, but where you have this love-hate relationship with where you're from, because it's the place where you found yourself and you found your people, but it's also the first place that you were ever made to feel bad about who you are or who your people are. And so I thought that this would be a really cool opportunity for people to celebrate the parts of Texas that they love without, where they can check the shitty parts at the door, you know what I mean? And we had like a tattoo artist on stage throughout the show giving pay what you want tattoos, and it all went to the Transgender Education Network of Texas. So it was a really special show. And I got my first tattoo on stage while I was hosting. So
what is it? What does it say?
It's a little cowboy hat on the back of my arm. Yeah, nice. It's pretty cool. Yeah. So I think that I love when the kindness is real. You know what I mean? And like once you scrape past the facade that some people hide behind, and you find that like it's genuine, and it is in a lot of people, that's really special, and like queso as well. Do
you find that New York is more accepting of the LGBT community?
I think on the aggregate, I think like a lot of it is just a matter of exposure. You know what I mean? Because I think back in Texas, I have become like the first trans person that a lot of my friends and family have ever met or seen or like known to exist. And so like when they talk about, I guess specifically trans people, but the LGBT community at large, like they are speaking in this like hypothetical scenario way, like they're arguing against like a concept, as opposed to people in New York see trans people on the train or whatever, you know what I mean? Like they know that it exists.
More familiar.
Like, I think it's a matter of familiarity and seeing like, oh, like this isn't like, like they're able to more easily look past like the fear mongering that you see on a lot of like news outlets, because it's like, oh, well, I've seen a trans person and they didn't groom me on the train or whatever, as opposed to, well, I've never seen a trans person. So the only like, story I have about trans people to go off of is what I'm hearing from Tucker Carlson or whatever, who also probably has never met a trans person.
And does that come from just stereotypes that are completely not true? Like, where do you think people, you say like the fear mongering, where do you think people would potentially get that from?
Where do people get fear mongering from?
I know it's a loaded question, but where would you think?
Yeah, I think it just comes from discomfort, you know what I mean? As opposed to, I think people want to take like this moral high ground while still being bad people. Like I think people don't want to just say like, that's icky to me, or I'm confused by, I don't know, your desire to live in a gender that I don't understand or something like that. Like I think that they don't want to own, because a lot of people can see themselves being on the wrong side of history, but still not like getting with it. You know what I mean? So I think that there are people who won't call themselves out, but they will quietly acknowledge to themselves that they're like wrong ultimately, and that like there's the Martin Luther King Jr. quote that like the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So I think a lot of people know that to be true, and they know that trans people aren't hurting anyone, but because it makes them uncomfortable, and because someone out there like Tucker Carlson is like propelling these myths that there's danger there, that's like, it's easier to say, oh, I'm scared of the danger than I'm made uncomfortable by your existence.
Yeah, like there's not something specific that you could point to.
Yeah, it's just a matter of being a little uncomfy.
When did you start your journey transitioning?
Yeah. So I was like 5 years old. My very first memory, and I have a song about this. I play some like live music as well. That's vaguely funny.
Give us a quote from the song too.
I just maybe the song will sum it all up. But I go home alone on a Tuesday. Dad's at work, and that's true because my dad would always go to the auto auction. He sells cars, so on Tuesdays was the day that he was at the auto auction, and he would always bring me a toy car home from the auto auction. And so while I was home alone, my sister's got a closet full of clothes, and I have half a mind to try them on. And I put on my older sister's dress and some makeup and stuff. And my dad got home, and he wasn't like horrible about it, but he made a joke that, oh, I guess I should have got you a Barbie. But he wasn't being like serious, you know. He wasn't like, oh wow, I should.
And you remember this as a 5-year-old?
This is like, yeah, my very first memory is feeling gender dysphoria, like wanting to, like having a curiosity about femininity, and also feeling wrong about it. You know what I mean? My dad saying like, oh, like, you know, he was, you know, being a little bit insincere when he said like, oh, I should have brought you a Barbie or whatever. So like, yeah, I've known that I was experiencing gender dysphoria like throughout my life. And then my parents, they separated briefly for like a year, my freshman year. And so it was just my mom and I living together. They got back together. But while it was just me and my mom, she shared something about her life with me that was like deeply personal, and it really moved me to be like, hey, well, can I share something with you? And I told her about like gender dysphoria, and I wish that I could be a fly on the wall for that conversation because
Between you and your mom, freshman year?
Yeah, of high school. So I was like 14, and this was before like Caitlyn Jenner or Laverne Cox or any of these like mainstream trans identities. And I just told her like, I am transgender. This is like how we like block hormones. This is how we start taking more, like I like fully educated her on.
Was this
on
you
all this
like
stuff.
doing a bunch of research on this by yourself?
Yeah, I guess I'd done a whole bunch of like Googling and like equipped myself.
And you found that it was readily available though at this time?
Yeah. I mean, so this would have been in like 2009.
Okay.
2008 or 2009. And it is wild to me in hindsight because that's a lot of like on Reddit and stuff. When I hear about people who come out when they're younger, it's like they just tell their parent like, I'm confused and I want to live as a girl.
You were
or,
like
whatever.
educating your mom.
Yeah, like normally it's the parent who is then charged with like finding resources and figuring out what to do about it. I was just like, I just need you to co-sign. Like I've done all the work for you. And I think that my mom conflated gender and sexuality. And so when I continued like dating girls, she just was like, okay, cool, you're healed. And that's, I think, like the thing that really pushed me from starting my transition and like really being persistent.
Why? Just because you were consistently dating females?
Yeah.
And acting as a straight male?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like I played the role so well, like I mentioned, like I like sports, like I'm, you know, and I played them well. And then when I went to college, like I was very much like the leading man in the plays, and I could grow like a wicked, like Shakespearean beard and stuff, you know? And so I think like I fit into this like cishet male role extremely well, in a way that made it a little bit more difficult. Like one of my very earliest friends that I ever knew in real life who was trans was a very feminine gay guy when I met her, or that's how she was presenting. And then she came out as non-binary and then as a trans woman. And it was like, people could understand that, like they could follow along a little bit more easily than like, wait, but you were, you know, you're the Troy Bolton of our high school type vibe, you know? And so I think it was really difficult for people to understand that. And I think even I was like, I made myself a little bit more uncomfortable. Like I remember the first time I talked to a counselor at TCU about it, I was like in a Chekhov play or something. And so it was like,
what's that?
Anton Chekhov.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It wrote like The Seagull, and Three Sisters was the play. But I was growing out my facial hair so they could figure out what to do with it or whatever. So like I had a pretty gnarly beard. And then I'm telling this woman about like my gender dysphoria that I've had my whole life. And I just remember feeling so like gross about myself and how I looked, like that. I just remember staring at the ground the entire time I was telling her about it, because I was so like embarrassed to, you know, and I wasn't even using these words, but the way it felt like it was being perceived as like, I'm this man's man and I'm saying like, I want to be a pretty princess or whatever, you know, like, and she obviously was like incredibly kind and, you know, handled it professionally and was cool. But yeah, like I feel like I judged myself and could, I don't know, like predict a lot of the judgment that I would have experienced. So yeah, and then like digging further into this like masculinity hole that I was in, I ended up founding a fraternity at TCU my junior year, and then I worked for that fraternity for 2 years as like a leadership consultant. So I would go to different schools where there was a chapter and give like anti-hazing workshops and things like that. And it was already a pretty interesting experience. And then when you come out as trans, like it's like even weirder that you ever worked for a fraternity. But yeah, like that's like as masculine like as it gets. And And then finally, I have Lexi has always been super kind and supportive to me, and she helped me. And I was like, I think early last year that I was finally like, all right, I think I'm ready to come out and like transition. And I know that I have a fiance who loves me and is like, she's bi, so it's like perfect. We're not like in terms of the logistics of this romantically, it makes sense and it's going to work out. I because of those nerves that I felt like when I had the full beard and everything and was like staring at the ground, I wanted to develop kind of a proof of concept is what I kept referring to before we came out to like my parents and her parents and things like that. And so I wanted to like take hormones for a little while and like do laser hair removal on my face and stuff so that it was like, oh, you can literally just kind of see what I'm going for, you know what I mean? And so I posted on my close friend's Instagram story though. And turns out there were people who were logged in to Lexi's account that shouldn't have been. So some people that we weren't ready to share with saw all this information where I was like kind of comically open about exactly what this meant. I did like a Q&A on my close friends where it was like, I'm going to talk to a doctor about taking hormones. Like, what does that mean? It means I'm headed in the direction of she, her pronouns, and this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do, And so basically these people then threatened to out me to my family, and it was this crazy, horrible thing. And so I had to come out to my parents the very next day. And my dad, he handled it okay. I was like, hey, we need to talk. Someone's threatening to share something that's not really theirs to share. And he said, okay. And we did for about an hour and a half talk about it. And at the end, my dad just said, you know what, Jess, you're an adult. You can do whatever you want and need to live authentically. And if that means taking hormones, I'm not going to stop you. And fuck anybody that thinks that makes you less of a man. I said, well, less of a man is the idea, but the right idea. And that's like now like one of my stand-up bits that I do, which is a really fun story because it's just like the perfectly wrong phrase to use, but
trying to be supportive.
Yeah, definitely like the right mentality. And yeah, my parents have been pretty good, supportive. But yeah, so actually started hormones like last October. So it's been a pretty wild ride.
Love it.
Yeah.
That's great. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, like this is totally valid when people do this, but I see a lot of the time trans people, there's like a 1 to 2 when I scroll on their Instagram, and I'm often like fascinated by people's journey just because of how like, I've always been inspired by trans folks. I often see like a 1 to 2 year period where they get really into like nature, because they don't post any photos of themselves because they're figuring it out, and they owe it to themselves. Like that privacy is definitely sacred and something that they deserve to have if they want it. But for me, I just felt like I came out fully, like worked up the nerve to come out to my mom when I was 14 years old.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that big gap.
Yeah. She basically she made a joke like, oh, well, you'd be a tall girl or whatever. And I was like, yeah, okay.
Well, was there a point in time when you came out to your mom and then, you were dating girls in high school, your mom kind of just like forgot about it and thought it was like a small phase that would have gone away?
Yeah. And I think like the thing that leads me to believe she thought it was a sexuality thing is that when I broke up with the girl that I'd been dating at that time, she said like, did you and her break up because you're gay? And I was like, what? No. But in hindsight, I'm like, oh, she was thinking that conversation we had was about me being gay, but it wasn't. And so she just like, I think whether it was like a choice that she made or a genuine like confusion, like she was misunderstanding.
So she kind of took it as I'm not understanding what my child is thinking right now.
Yeah. So,
instead of like a specific conversation.
Exactly, yeah. And so I feel like having had to work up the nerve to come out now twice, because it's already mortifying to have to do once.
Well, but the first time, who was really taking your words seriously, though?
Yeah, no one, exactly, yeah. So it was just such a waste of like the most bravery I had ever had to, accumulate in order to do that. And then it was just like, what? No. And it's weird. Now I have like this this fun thing where like anytime I see a tall girl, I'm like, a tall girl, look, like they exist, like it's like, oh my God, amazing.
You.
Yeah. Cause it's like, Mom, that's fine. There are tall girls, like cis and trans women. Like they're tall. There's tall women all over New York. And it, so like, it weirdly like inspires me in such a strange way. But I feel like I owed it to myself because I tried to come out and transition when I was 14. So I was just like, you know what, like I'm not gonna, basically ghost, especially with the pandemic too, like ravaging like a year or 2 years of our lives. It's like, I've already lost that much time in my life. So why spend any more time, like, avoiding the limelight or avoiding opportunities to perform or things like that. So I've just like kind of transitioned like under a spotlight, which has been really terrifying. Like that, the second verse of that song that I talked about is not about the first verse is all about my first experience, like seeing myself. And then the second verse is about like the first time I ever allowed an audience to see me, which is the first time I wore a dress on stage. I was so scared. And it's like, our special guest that week was Frankie Grande, who is the gayest man in America. So it's
was that Ariana Grande's brother?
Yeah. Who is like he is the most talented person ever.
So when was the first time you did that, by the way?
That was maybe like 4 or 5 or 6 months ago. Yeah.
Wow. So this is all pretty recent for you.
Yeah. And I had no business being nervous because I knew like Frankie is like, very queer and very open and accepting, and like his audience is as well. But yeah, like it was daunting, and I think that was a really cool experience. But yeah, like so it's all been kind of new. But I decided to do that like on stage because like I just didn't want to waste any more time in my life.
And that's the most real you'll feel. I'm sure that's your one passion, and you're doing what really makes you feel comfortable. Are there certain things that are coming up in a month to month that you're dealing with that you otherwise wouldn't expect that you would have had to deal with? Transitioning?
Yeah. I mean, I think like there's like all these little rites of passage. Like, I mean, I'm going to Toronto next week. There's like the grand reopening of Second City Toronto.
Oh,
so
dope.
I'm gonna go just be in attendance there, and it hasn't really dawned on me because it hasn't mattered. My passport, like the photo is very outdated, and like I got a new driver's license photo and like changed the M to an F or whatever, but need to do that with my passport. So I'm gearing up for like an awkward conversation with the border, agent.
Well, and also is there legal first name changes that you have to do too?
So yeah, like my all I did was like drop an E off the end of my name. And like Jesse is like kind of a gender neutral name anyway. So like I think there's a bit of a process to like do that, but
that's
convenient. I just kind of like colloquially go by Jess, and it's not, no biggie. So that's been an interesting thing to have to like gear up for, and this is actually something where I'm like so grateful for like trans YouTubers that I used to follow and stuff, because
like a James Charles type.
So James Charles, I wonder if James Charles is ever gonna transition. He's so beautiful, yeah. But like Gigi Gorgeous is a trans YouTuber that I've like followed forever, since before she transitioned, and some of these YouTubers have like had experiences that would have been really overwhelming and daunting for me to have like without any expectation that they could happen. Case in point, airport security, when you go through the airport scanner where you like hold your arms up like this, the TSA agent presses a button that says man or woman, and it like scans you differently based on what they press, and the scan is like making assumptions about your genitalia based on what it presses. And so the thing that I think Gigi Gorgeous has a very specific video where she experienced this, where they press girl because they read her correctly, but then it like read male, quote unquote, male genitalia. And so then she had to get like frisked. And I think she got like, I don't know, like a really intense, like bad situation happened as a result of it. And so like when I was at the Austin airport a few months ago, and it was like, it's weird because it was like kind of a little victory where the person read me correctly as a woman. However, they, because they did that, then the scanner went off. And I luckily I knew that this might happen because of that YouTube video I'd seen before. So I wasn't like, what's going on? Like I wasn't confused by it, but I did see the TSA agent's eyebrows just kind of raise a little bit because they know they're about to have like an awkward conversation. But I see that, and I turn a little bit, and I see there's just like a big red square around my crotch, and so like she handled it perfectly. You know, I think this was better to have happen in Austin than in any other airport in Texas, because the woman was just like, okay, I'm gonna ask her. She walks up to me and she's like, hey, what are your pronouns? I said, they're she, her, but
Handled it well.
But that is what that is, and I like, you know, just had to kind of acknowledge it, and luckily it was like a woman, and like she was very cool, and she just gave me a little pat down or whatever. But like, so there's little rites of passage like that where it's like, you know, like I went to a wedding like as a woman for the first time recently, and it was at like the Yale Club. It was a very fancy wedding with a bunch of people from TCU were there too, and it was like this extremely special thing where like I don't know, like I love my ultra woke friends in like Bushwick and stuff who include me no matter what, and who would have included me like while I had that facial hair and everything. But it kind of feels like a little bit performative, like, come on, girl, and with like an X instead of the I for girl or whatever. And like, it just feels like there's a slight asterisk in my inclusion. And it feels really special when like these people who have no agenda to be like, well, it's weird because the inclusive people are the best people in the world. But when I'm with people who like are very much like fitting a binary and still see me on the right side of the binary that I've always wanted to fit onto, it's really special to me. So when I'm included in like women's spaces and just like seen for who I am and have always been and wanted to be, is really meaningful to me. So like going to that wedding and it's like these really, you know, I don't know, like very TCU people who are buttoned up and who have probably never interacted with a trans person, at least knowingly, before, who then are like getting all the TCU girls to go to the dance floor, and they didn't think twice about like waving me on. And it didn't feel like, and Jess, wink, like you can come. It was just like, yeah, of course, like all the TCU girls are coming to the dance floor, so come on. Like those moments like that are really special to me. So yeah, I think a lot of core memories are definitely like happening through, like, I think probably every month there's like at least one really meaningful thing.
How did the rest of your family take you transitioning, and then also your friends, like growing up, seeing you differently at all? Like, how was that?
Yeah.
Or how has that been, I guess?
It's been interesting. Yeah. My, I don't know, like I have a sister whose dress I tried on, you know,
Yeah.
and she's 10 years older than me. So we've never been like super, super close. But yeah, she has like young children, and I think she's just like not super aware of like how to handle it. And I don't know if she's like really trying that hard to understand it. So like we're, you know, pretty estranged at this point. And I think like missing a sister, like I think that I grew up on this dynamic with like little quote unquote brother and older sister is like not that meaningful of a dynamic for like, you know, with 10 years apart, like it's just not an iconic relationship.
Yeah, you're not really in the house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like senior in high school, and what, you were like 11?
Yeah, exactly.
Or younger than that.
Yeah, so it's like it just wasn't a very strong bond. Even like older brother, younger sister is a strong thing because it's like you look out for, you know.
Yeah, okay.
But so like there wasn't like a really strong connection that we were like anchored by, like, you know, societally. But then I think it was like just this wedding actually, and getting ready for it, and like I was wearing like a form-fitting dress, like and I was like really excited to share that with family or anyone like who was close to me. All of a sudden, like that was the first time that I told my sister, like, yeah, I'm really excited for this wedding I'm going to, and we hadn't talked in a little bit, and I was kind of leading the witness. I was like also really excited for my outfit, like.
Are you on
asking me about it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, very much baiting her, and she did not take the bait, and it was like and
I bet you're gonna look great.
Yeah, and I don't know, like I think that like it was the first time I I gave someone an opportunity to be an older sister to me as like older sister, younger sister, and she didn't take it, and all of a sudden like I have this like cavity in my heart that I'm yearning for like an older sister. So for listeners,
I would think it would just take her a little bit of time to get fully comfortable with it.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like I wish, I don't know, it's like maybe I don't know, her thing is like that she doesn't understand, and it's like,
well, she will though. Yeah. And I think that comes at like her own timing, just like our careers in general, you know, like we'll get our biggest gigs X amount of years in, you know, you won't get it like 6 months in, 2 years in, something like that. So I think it's just, you know, a continuous growing and basis based on that. That's great. So what would you say to maybe somebody who is thinking about their transition, or maybe they think that they're gay, they're like confused. What were some of the thoughts that you had in your mind just as an individual, I guess, like young boy, not really having many people to relate to, right?
Yeah, I think that it's like, the internet is a useful tool, and you can use it to, find people who are like you and who have gone through pretty much any situation, whether it's losing family as a result of coming out or feeling like you might, And I think,
did you experience that at all?
Yeah. I think it's been interesting because like we've lost some of my fiance's family as well, and so it's like been this interesting thing where I feel certain guilt, and it's like I'm not the one like doing a bad thing here. Like ultimately,
No.
it's like it's people's bigotry that caused some disconnect between us and family members, but it feels like my transition is the reason their bigotry matters all of a sudden, so it's like I've definitely dealt with some guilt there, but we've lost some family and like some friends as well here and there, not everyone, which is great, and I think luckily I'd confided in enough people and that certainly gave me the strength. Like speaking to this person hypothetically again, like if you feel like there are people who would react positively, rely on those people and lean on them, because that's what I definitely did, that like gave me the strength to be like, all right, I'm not going to lose everybody. I definitely know I have some people who will stay in my corner like after I come out, and I think too, like there's this
You can't live your life for other people,
right? Yeah, and I think like so like a lot of people in my life who I thought I was like on the fence about whether or not they would react positively have proven to be incredible folks who have stepped up for me in a really big, meaningful way, and I think what's really sad, and I have a friend who is like struggling to come out as gay right now to his family. And
how old is he?
He's like 26, yeah. I think what he's dealing with, weirdly, is like I've just coined this term like earlier this week, is Schrodinger's bigot, or Schrodinger's homophobe or transphobe or whatever. But it's like you're dealing with the negative repercussions of someone's bigotry, without actually like coming out. So you don't even get the benefits of coming out and living authentically, but you are proactively responding to their hatred or bigotry toward you. And so it's like, if you're already suffering from how you perceive this person's going to react, you might as well reap the benefits of being free and living authentically.
I think that also just speaks to how people can live their life in general. Like people are always going to think what they think.
Yeah.
But you might as well just do what you do, because people are going to think a certain way either way you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, it's also, there's like a literal fear involved. Like, because I think, yesterday was Trans Day of Remembrance, and there was like a major like shooting in Colorado Springs. Yeah. At a gay club. And so you do need to be vigilant and like stay aware of your surroundings. Like, freedom does not mean freedom from thought or presence, because you do need to like be aware of your surroundings and things like that, but not at the expense of authenticity and like being yourself. I think you can find your people. They exist everywhere, and like maybe more out trans people live in New York and LA and places like that, but that's only because those are known spaces where trans folks can exist freely and thrive. Because I am not a New Yorker by trade. Like I am a Midland, Texas native, and I am trans, and thought that while I was in Midland. And it was not a matter of like New York making me trans. It was being trans and fleeing to New York as like a refugee, basically, and so knowing that like people exist wherever you are who can resonate with you. Like there was a thing on I think it's the U.S. Census or something like it that said like 1 in every 200 people are trans, and that's like quote unquote not a lot of people. Like that's uncommon, and people say like that's less than 1% of the population. I'm like, that's 1 in every 200 people. Like, and I graduated in a pretty big school with like 800 people, so it's like there's 3 other people at this school who feel what I'm feeling
in your year, right?
Yeah. And that's people too who like have taken a survey and like, felt comfortable saying that on a survey. So it's definitely at least 0.5% and probably more than that.
Yeah,
and that just blows my mind. That's incredible. So, or, you know, like I've Midland, when I was growing up, had like a population a little over 100,000. So that would mean like, what is that? 500 people, I think. There's 500 trans people in Midland, Texas. Like, that's crazy if my math is right. It is. That's right. That's 500 people. That's incredible. That's so encouraging. And it's like, it's sad that I think, I don't know, with trans stuff specifically, it's interesting because a lot of people's goal is like to be stealth and to transition to the point of invisibility, whether it's like a defense mechanism or just a goal.
But what do you mean by that?
So meaning like passing is a big thing that people talk about, is like reading as a cisgender woman, as like a trans woman. Because like, I don't know, like people read me as female, like on the street and stuff now, but for a little while it was like I was visibly trans. And like, I think in certain instances I still am, you know, but a lot of people, like, they transition, and whether it's a matter of, I think a lot of the time it's just out of safety and like out of necessity.
They want to skip that portion where they kind of look like their old self, maybe.
Yeah. And people who don't want to disclose their trans identity to other people because they fear violence and, if nothing else, like just fear a lack of acceptance and things like that. And so with gay people and like other members of other letters in the LGBT community, it's like they're fighting for visibility and fighting to love freely out in the world. And I think that's true of the trans community, but a lot of people individually work really hard to become invisible and like just transition so well that they assimilate into a like cisgender heteronormative like society. And so like there's absolutely like trans people that I don't know are trans who I like probably looked up to my entire life. And I wish that I had, you know, known or been able to like, I don't know, wish there was like a secret hand sign or something like that. But yeah. But trans people exist everywhere. And I think, you know, using the internet in a meaningful way is huge. Like just, you know, equipping yourself and, you know, knowing that you're valid and that it's a beautiful thing too. Like I think my heart kind of goes out to people who have never had to fight to be themselves because they don't then have to do a whole lot of internal work to figure out who their self is. And so that's one really beautiful thing about, I think, anyone in the queer community is that like people have told you like you are not valid and you have had to stake your claim for and like so really long, like man. Dig your heels in and say, no, I am valid. And I actually know really well who I am. And I have a stronger sense of self than you probably do. You know, like it's like a really special thing that you have had to fight to be who you are. Yeah, so it's been a beautiful experience, I think.
So the past year for you has been the best year of your life, you think?
Absolutely, yeah.
Freaking love that.
Yeah.
Love that, Jess. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was an
Thanks
amazing episode. So shout out where we can see you next. Are you performing every week at Asylum? And we'll pop up your Instagram right here.
Every week at Asylum NYC. You can check me out at Asylum Main Stage Presents. We've got Joe Firestone coming up in a couple of weeks.
Let's go!
So yeah, hope to see you there.
And Instagram, we're popping it up.
And
it's right here.
Jess_Elgene right there.
Absolutely. Jess, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Peace.